Introduce our speakers this afternoon, Geraint Lewis and Rhian Hall. Geraint and Rhian are both volunteers with the Jewish History Association of South Wales. The Jewish History Association of South Wales was established in November 2017 with the aim to uncover, document, preserve and share the tangible and intangible cultural heritage of the Jewish communities of South Wales. Geraint is a second-year undergraduate at the University of South Wales and has been involved with the work of the Jewish History Association of South Wales at Cynon Valley Museum since November 2019. Rhian has a BA in History and an MSc in Care of Collections from Cardiff University. She started volunteering at the Cynon Valley Museum in October 2019 and a few months later was offered the opportunity to work with the Jewish History Association of South Wales. She has a real interest in social history and wanted to learn more about the Jewish community in South Wales, as it wasn't a topic that she'd explored before. As a team, they've unearthed dozens of Jewish-related items amongst the collection at Cynon Valley Museum, and today they'll be explaining not only what they found, but how they found it. So I'm going to hand over now to Rhian and to Geraint. Over to you.
Thank you for joining us today. Can everyone see the presentation?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. So yes, today we will be discussing our project based at Cynon Valley Museum, in which we aimed to identify and research materials relating to the local Jewish community. So it has already been covered a little bit, but I was just going to talk about the Jewish History Association. So what we do, our main aims are to preserve tangible and intangible cultural heritage relating to the Jewish communities, to make these historical records, artifacts and oral history interviews available to the public, and to also just promote and raise awareness of the Jewish heritage of South Wales. So some of our projects do include recording oral history interviews with members past and present of the communities in South Wales, also creating a digital archive on People's Collection Wales website, which actually now consists of over 3,000 images of all the items that we have identified. And then some of our more current projects include researching the 102 names on the Cardiff Reform Synagogue memorial tablet, as well as creating a Jewish community digital trail for Cardiff. One project which we're obviously focusing on today is the research of materials in Rhondda Cynon Taf museums, and we will be focusing on Cynon Valley Museum. So I'm just going to let Geraint give you a brief history of the Jewish communities in the Cynon Valley.
Yeah, so as Rhian said, we're based in the Cynon Valley Museum. So the two principal towns in the Cynon Valley are Aberdeen and slightly smaller town of Mountain Ash. It's important to remember before probably 1840, there was around 1,000 to 2,000 people in Aberdeen. As you can see in the graph, I think it's 1801, there was just over 1,000. In 1871, there was around 40,000. So obviously, most people know why that is the coal industry. Coal was discovered in, well, I think people knew there was coal there for centuries, but they really started getting it out in vast amounts in the 1840s. As you can see in the graph, and it peaked in about 1921, I believe, at about 55,000 or thereabouts, and it's gone down. As you can see in the 1970s, it's gone back down to about just under 40,000. But the Jewish people really started to arrive in the Cynon Valley and in Aberdeen in particular in around 1850, 1860, around that kind of area. And some of our research, which we've done mainly in the Aberdeen library and a little bit in the museum, but it's mostly in the library, as found in Slater's directory, business directory of 1858-59, there was a Mr. Harris Freeman and a Lyons and Hyman working as pawnbrokers and general dealers. So I think there's a good chance there were other Jewish people in and around that time, but maybe they weren't quite as legitimate as those two because they were in the directory. Some other early Jewish names in Aberdeen in the 1860s and 1870s include Abraham Friedman, Lazarus Coslebury, and Solomon Abrams. And obviously it didn't take them long then as a Jewish community to set up a congregation and a synagogue. In terms of a synagogue, they rented private rooms to start with in, I think it might have been Cardiff Road or Cardiff Street in Aberdeen. It was a little bit sketchy with details of that because it was very sort of ad hoc and there's not a lot to point us in that direction. But in 1889, a prominent Jewish businessman called David Hart, who was a pawnbroker, let the community congregate and hold services in his house in Seymour Street in Aberdeen on the bottom level. And if anybody knows Aberdeen now, there's a blue plaque on that building now because it later became the actual synagogue. But it started off just this Mr. David Hart just letting his room be used in a sort of temporary basis. But after David Hart's death in 1902, several Jewish business people, including Morris Jacobs, who I'll cover a little bit later, purchased the building and fitted it out as a synagogue throughout, including upstairs rooms, which beforehand hadn't been there. So Morris Jacobs carried on looking after the synagogue until after his death. They sort of called it a guardian, I suppose. They sort of backed it financially and sort of looked after it, made sure all the bills were paid and everything was hunky-dory in that respect. But after Morris Jacobs' death, another prominent Cunning Valley businessman, who Rian will cover, Victor Fried, took that role. Then Aubrey Fried, Victor's son, took that role over until the end of the synagogue in about 1957. What we found out about the synagogue, obviously that's a hub of Jewish life. A reverend was employed and a community grew from strength to strength. The Second World War brought a lot of refugees into Britain and South Wales, and that sort of bolstered the congregation at that time. Like I said, the synagogue continued after the war as a place of worship, but the congregation started to dwindle after the war. The recession hit South Wales, the mines were closing. People decided, and Jewish people decided, that the Cunning Valley wasn't the place where it was basically to make money, so they sort of went to Cardiff and London, and by 1957 it just wasn't feasible. As you can see there, 1946 it was 63 Jewish people in Aberdeen, and I think by the 50s that had dropped. I'm not sure the exact numbers, but it would have dropped down more, almost to single figures, I imagine. And as I said earlier, Victor Fried's son Aubrey was the final guardian of the synagogue in about 1957. And Aberdeen at the moment and the Cunning Valley, I don't think there is any practicing Jewish person or anyone who would identify Jewish, not as I know of anyway. But we don't really look at that. We look at the history, but it's really sad. But yeah, so that's a little very sort of brief history of the Cunning Valley and the Jews which once lived there. So I think Rian's going to talk about Victor Fried now.
So we'll just give a bit of background about the project and what our main aims were. So ultimately we were trying to identify objects that did belong to or were associated to the Jewish community in and around Aberdeen. And to do this we were using a computer. I think you can see in the image, that computer in the Cunning Valley Museum had the database which had the collection recorded on it. And that had over 20,000 items recorded on it, and we would be using that to try and sift through and find the objects related to the Jewish community. And then from there we would be researching each item, trying to pick out important information. And this was all so that it could be added back onto the database, so that these items would have the historical context and the interpretation that they deserved, really, to be identified as a Jewish collection. And then part of this, the sort of final part, would be digitising all the items that we found. So this included scanning and photographing, so that we had a digital copy that they could be catalogued and then put online for people to see on the digital archive, which is on the People's Collection Wales website. So how did we really go about this? We first started off with training in collections care, so sort of how to handle different objects and materials. And we also had training on how to use the modes database, because, as I said, there were over 20,000 items on there, and we didn't want to press the wrong button or accidentally delete anything. So that was really important. We had a small team. There was 3 of us working 1 day a week at Cunning Valley Museum. And we just started off initially by searching the modes database for really just keywords such as Jew, Jewish, Jewish community, Hebrew, synagogue, just to sort of get an idea of what they had on there that was recorded as such, to see if there was anything at all. Unfortunately, this didn't yield many results. So we realised we did have a lot of research to do. One of the members of our team was actually a local historian, and he had a really great knowledge. So he brought in a list of keywords of individuals' names, family names, different social groups and businesses, all related to the Jewish community in Aberdeen. So this was a good starting point. And I think one of our first successes was we searched the name Victor Fried, and then we actually came up with a lot of results on the collection database. So that was a really successful point. From there, one of us would be researching and finding key pieces of information, and this, as Geraint said, included going to the local library, using their archive of newspapers and also ancestry websites. And then 2 of us would search the object storerooms and be checking through the boxes for items relating to our research. As I said, because of the documentation system, not much was labelled in terms of, like, the information was not very detailed, so it would not specifically say that this related to a Jewish businessman or a Jewish-owned business. So if we found one item, say if we found one Victor Fried item in a box, we would then go through the whole box and see if there was anything else significant in there. So it was quite a long process, but we tried to be very thorough in our approach. And then once we did find items, we would record their information. So we would record their accession number and all the context of, well, all the details of the item, so that that could be catalogued. And then we would do a digital scan on the printer so that it could be turned into a digital copy. So yeah, as I said, the first successful sort of point was finding the Victor Fried items, and that also led us into finding out about other individuals, because it was never really a large community, but it was sort of a tight-knit community in the sense that a lot of them were in the same sort of circles, social groups, or had the same type of businesses. So when we found out about Victor Fried, we also started to find more items relating to Benjamin Schwartz, who also owned a furniture business in Aberdeen town. So as I was saying, a lot of the items we found were related to businesses. So I'll just show you a few examples. So on here we have some product invoices and receipts from Jewish businesses. This one on the left is from M. Sugarman and Sons, so that's Michael Sugarman, and they had a sort of painting, decorating business. So that's a receipt from their company. And on the right is the Aberdeen Furnishing Company. which was owned by Benjamin Schwartz and came to be quite a successful furniture business. We also found a lot of advertisements for Jewish businesses. So there's two businesses we'll be discussing today, which is M. Jacobs and Sons, who was drapers, and Victor Fried Limited, who had a lot of different departments. He did furniture, electrical, musical instruments. And then this last advertisement on the far right, that is for a women's clothing company called Jane Cooper, and that was owned by a Jewish woman named Ruth Goldberg. And then also we found images of Jewish-owned shop fronts, as you can see here. So that first one is a Victor Fried shop. That's one of his piano shops. The one in the middle is Morris Jacobs and Sons. That was his draper shop. And then the final one is the Aberdeen Furnishing Company. We also found some larger objects, which when I went into this, I kind of thought we would find a lot of images and documents, but we found some larger objects, which was really exciting. So as you can see in the middle, there's actually a Hoover, and that was bought from a Victor Fried shop in 1954. So next to it is the receipt. So that's how we found it. We found on the collections database, we found the entry for the receipt, and we saw that attached to it was another accession number for the actual Hoover itself. So that was really exciting. We got to photograph that. And then there's also this wooden plaque, which presents the names of the past presidents of the Aberdeen Rotary Club, and Victor Fried and his son Aubrey both appear on this. So Victor Fried is in 1941, and Aubrey Fried is in 1968, I believe. So there are some larger objects there. So I'm just going to discuss a bit more about Victor Fried and his business empire. So the 1901 census shows that Victor Fried was born in 1883 in Russia to Solomon and Gertrude Fried. The 1901 census also shows that by that time they were living in Aberdeen. We're not 100% sure why they specifically made that move, but his father Solomon was recorded as being a picture frame dealer, whilst his mother was recorded as being a furniture shopkeeper. Interestingly, his older brother Nathan, who at the time was aged 28, is detailed as the furniture shop manager, whereas Victor himself, aged 18, is recorded as a furniture canvasser. So it seems that he must have acquired the skills from this family business to create his own, because by 1904 he began trading in Mountain Ash at number 57 and 59 Oxford Street. And he became known as a complete house furniture and musical instrument dealer. So his business did eventually expand. By the 1930s, he had shops on Cardiff Street and Market Street in Aberdeen. In the 1950s, he'd expanded to Duke Street in Cardiff. And in the 1960s, he occupied the former cinema building on Market Street in Aberdeen. And then even further, by the 1970s, he also had shop in Merthyr Tydfil. So he acquired more, it seems he acquired more and more shops to fit all his products. And actually they were split into different departments. So at number 1, Cardiff Street, he had music and instruments, and also a level for furniture. At number 60, he had, at number 60 Cardiff Street, so on the same road, he had an electrical department. And then he also kept his store in Mountain Ash, which was a television department. And I think what made Victor Fried so successful was that he marketed his business to be high quality, but also available to everyone. So his adverts, his furniture adverts boasted that his products were for mansion or cottage. And also his pianos were a really popular product because they were 25% cheaper than other dealers, but still good brands and high quality. He was also known to supply instruments and furniture to schools and education committees, and he also helped to furnish the 1960s council houses in Aberdeen. So by the time he was 28, he was married to Olga Fried, who was a Jewish woman originally from Germany, and together they had 6 children. Whilst they were growing up, the family were known to live in the Butte Villa, it was called, and this was seen to be a pretty spectacular house to live in at the time, which sort of shows his success and his wealth. And as I said, they lived next door to another Jewish family, the Schwartzes. It seems that the entire Fried family became involved in the business, as one of the censuses, from 1939, it records that his 2 daughters, Edna and Beatrice, actually worked as shop assistants at one of his radio departments. So Victor Fried was also a prevalent member of the Jewish community in Aberdeen. He had great involvement in the synagogue, as Geraint has already discussed, and he was also asked to give Torah readings for the congregation. In 1941, he was elected as the president of the newly formed Aberdeen Zionist Society. Also in 1941, he was elected as president of the Aberdeen Rotary Club, which we've shown on the large object. And this was after he'd been a member for 8 years. His sons were also involved in the Jewish community. Obviously, as Geraint said, Aubrey was the last ever secretary for the synagogue, and his other son, Reginald, was the last ever Aberdeen representative for the Board of Deputies. I think one of my favourite stories about Victor Fried was recorded in the Western Mail. In 1958, they reported that members of the Jewish community were helping to fund wards for the Pennylan Home for the Aged Jews in Cardiff. And it was announced that Victor Fried donated an entire ward, and he completed it with all furnishings, and this was in memory of his wife. So Victor Fried died in 1966 at the age of 83, and in his will he left over £142,000, which is the equivalent of over £2 million today. So I think that really speaks of his success. I'll now pass you on to Geraint, who will talk about another prevalent businessman.
Yeah, thank you, Rhian. Yeah, so part 2 of the big tour of Cunning Valley Jewish businessman, Morris Jacobs. As part of my work on the project, I was asked to research Morris Jacobs. It became apparent pretty quickly, really, that the 2 big businessmen in the Cunning Valley and Aberdeen in particular were Morris Jacobs and Victor Fried. The objects we found in relation to Morris Jacobs were photographs mainly of the exterior of the shop, as you can see in the slides, and a lot of them, as anybody who knows Aberdeen would know, from the 1950s onwards until about the 1990s, the buses would stop outside his shop. So we have a lot of accidental photographs of Morris Jacobs' shop with people taking photos of buses. So we're really lucky, actually, because obviously the shop wasn't the main focus of the photograph. After we done some research at the museum and Aberdeen Library, I was able to put a little bit of a picture together of his life. Maurice Jacobs was born in Salant, modern-day Lithuania, in the Russian Empire. He opened his first shop in the Cunning Valley at number 4 Frood Crescent, Mountain Ash, in 1874, primarily as a pawnbroker. However, as the years went by, the drapery side of the business took precedence, and the pawnbrokers elements sort of went back sort of counted, if you like. There was one entry in the local newspaper which said if you wanted the pawnbroking side at the end, in around the turn of the century, you'd have to go to the back of the shop. In 1884, Maurice Jacobs opened his second shop 4 miles up the valley at number 14 Cardiff Street, Aberdeen. In the 1901 census, Maurice Jacobs was living at number 14 Cardiff Street, Aberdeen, with his wife Julia, and unbelievably Lazarus, his son, Phoebe Ann, Elvira, Lena, Arthur, Lewis, Jean, Albert, Montague, Ernest, Sissy, and they also had a live-in housekeeper. So if anybody knows the old Maurice Jacobs shops in Aberdeen, it's not very big. So I think it would have been a bit of a squeeze. By 1911 and the census, the family had moved out of the Cunning Valley to 106 Cathedral Road, Cardiff. As I mentioned before, things in terms of money in the coal field were turning slightly, but also a bigger house probably needed. 2 seconds. Yeah, as mentioned before, Maurice Jacobs was a keen member of the Jewish community in Aberdeen, and not only Aberdeen, actually, the Cunning Valley, because as I said, he started in Mountain Ash. And anybody of a certain age in the valley now will remember his shop. Best known for his wide variety and collections of workman's clothes, and latterly, as my mother would testify, schoolwear. Edward Greening, a local historian and a Spanish Civil War veteran, wrote in his chapter from the Old Aberdeen Volume 2 book of his experiences of being taken to the Maurice Jacobs shop and being kitted out with, and I quote, moleskin trousers, blue flannel shirt, red muffler, and heavy hobnail boots. This was on the 31st of July 1924, prior to him starting his life as a collier boy. The Aberdeen Leader of May 2nd, 1908, carries an advert for Maurice Jacobs which reads, "The only complete working men's outfitters in the district." And there's another advert in the same edition advertising, amongst other things, working clothes, working boots, children's hobnail boots, bedding, jewellery, and a large quantity of blankets just arrived. Surely a shop for every domestic need, was the tagline. Anybody who knew Maurice Jacobs and the shop after 1929 would know a Mr. Sidney Shimalov. He began working in the Mountain Ash store in 1929, when the shop was still primarily a pawnbroker. A man who will be forever associated with Maurice Jacobs, Aberdeen. When he began his work in 1929, Mr. Shimalov was just 12 years of age, but would go on to rise to become the manager. Often seen on the Cardiff to Aberdeen bus, wearing his brown bowler hat and a three-piece suit, he must have been a character. Going back to Maurice Jacobs and the synagogue in particular, he was appointed secretary of the new synagogue, which he helped to purchase, as mentioned before, in 1902, with a Mr. B. Han. The Jewish Chronicle of the 25th of May 1894 states that Maurice Jacobs welcomes the chief rabbi to the synagogue chambers. And this was a massive event because it was a full, more or less a full page spread in the Jewish Chronicle. The Jewish Chronicle in 15th of March 1904 reports the sad death of Hannah, Maurice Jacobs' mother, at Merthyr Tydfil at the age of 78. From this article, we learn that Maurice had brothers, Solomon and William. The later was said to to be residing in Johannesburg, South Africa. Arthur Jacobs, Morris's son, fought in the First World War, and he joined the army in 1914 and was sent to France, where he was injured. After the war, he moved with his regiment to Greece, where not after the war, during the war. Yeah. He was sent to Greece, where he was captured by the Bulgarians in September 1918 and taken prisoner. But that wasn't the only war heroes that the Jacobs family produced. Two other sons of Morris Jacobs also fought during the war. E. Jacobs, probably Ernest, but we're not 100% sure, and Albert, who was at the end of the war, was in Castlemount Hospital in Dover, so presumably he was injured as well. Morris Jacobs died at the age of 72 in 1925 in Cardiff. Arthur, his son before the war, had become manager of the Aberdeen store and general manager of the Mountain Ash store, and presumably, although there's no evidence to suggest he didn't take over, but I think he did take over. There's a question, if anybody knows, actually. It's my turn for questions and answers. We're not 100% sure when the Mountain Ash store closed. We know the Aberdeen shop closed in around 1983, 1985, but I would be really keen as a Mountain Ash boy to know if anyone knew when that store closed. Yeah, so after over 100 years of trading, it closed in around 1984, 1985, and it was really sad. We've uncovered photographs of the building sort of shuttered up and looking sorry for itself. But then again, it was looking pretty much the same as it had sort of 50, 60 years before, with all the taglines and advertisements all on the front. But yeah, an Aberdeen and a Cunning Valley institution came to an end. So I'll pass you back over to Rian now, I think. Oh no, it's my turn again. Sorry. Okay. So I'm going to talk about now, because it's the Cynon Valley Museum after all, not just Aberdeen. As I mentioned, both Victor Freed and Morris Jacobs started their businesses in Mountain Ash. I'm not quite sure why, but possibly the rates may have been lower in a smaller town, and they moved soon after. They moved and expanded, I should say, to Aberdeen. Harris Barnett was a next-door neighbour of Morris Jacobs, at number 5 Rood Crescent, in the Kagaro area of Mountain Ash. Harris Barnett was born in Poland and described in the 1851 census as a Russian Jew. It's uncertain when he arrived in Wales, but he is present on the 1891 census, living at number 8 Cardiff Road, Mountain Ash, with his wife Annie, children Isaac, Damie, Abraham, David, Williams, and Harris's father, Jacob. Harris had an early business, we believe, in Hirwaun. Interestingly, it's the only Jewish business we have found in Hirwaun, in the top end of the Cynon Valley. We're not 100% certain it's the same man, but I'd say it's likely. Newspaper adverts show that Barnett had several businesses in the Cynon Valley and the eastern valleys of the South Wales coalfield. The Aberdeen leader mentions Harris's name numerous times, and unfortunately, it's always relating to court cases. His trade as a pawnbroker, no doubt, made this more likely. Most of the cases saw Harris as a victim, but in 1893, he was arrested and bailed at the Aberdeen Police Court for forging the signatures on lease documents in relation to the bankruptcy case of a Mr. Morgan Charles. Harris appeared before the Swansea Assizes Court on the 11th of August 1893 and was acquitted. 1895 saw Harris purchase a shop and premises at Margaret Street, Abercunnan, where his family and children went on to live for many years afterwards. Again in 1895, Harris appears in the local press after his shop at number 5 Rood Crescent is saved from fire by, I quote, Sergeant Smith and a posse of police. By the time the Barnett family are living in Pontypridd, and Harris is commuting every day from Mountain Ash to Pontypridd. His last misdemeanor was in 1896, when he was found guilty at Pontypridd Police Court of, and I quote, travelling in a superior carriage to the one his season ticket entitled him to. Sadly, that same year, 1896, Harris Barnett died on December the 10th at the age of only 43. He is buried at the Jewish cemetery at Cefn in Merthyr Tydfil. However, and I am not surprised, Harris appeared in the local press once again after his death. One final appearance in a courtroom. On the 12th of May 1900, Dr. Williams and Jones sued his widow, Mrs. Annie Barnett, for £50, which she owed them for Harris's medical care. Despite her estate being well in excess of the £50, she pleaded that she could not pay the fine. But unfortunately for Harris's wife, the judge ruled against her, and she was fined the £50 medical costs. So I think Harris Barnett must have been well known in Mountain Ash, because he appears in the Aberdeen Leader on probably 24, 25 occasions. Another character, not from Aberdeen, but not from Mountain Ash, sorry, living in Aberdeen mostly, but I've got to mention him because we found him in our research time and time again. And Mr. Zavil Badash. I would like to introduce you to a man who I would have thought from his name. Sorry, I would have thought he was a character as well. When we began researching the Jewish community in the Cunning Valley, this name kept cropping up, Zavil Badash. He was born in Grodno, modern-day Belarus, then in the Russian Empire, on 18th of May 1891. He married Rachel or Ray Fona in 1919 at the West End Talmud Torah Synagogue on 14 Minute Street, Charing Cross Road, London. The couple lived for many years at number 9 Carlton Terrace, Swansea, and then 121 Clodion Avenue, Cardiff. The initial reason I took an interest in Zavil Badash is because he seemed to be either in terrible trouble or suspect of being up to no good. The first mention of Badash comes in the Aberdeen Leader amongst other local papers in 1916. Badash was interviewed by police relating to the newly born female child's body discovered in his yard at the rear of the Iron Bridge pub in Aberdeen. During his interview with the coroner at Aberdeen police station, Badash recounted how he had on the previous day gone to Mountain Ash to collect rags around the Newtown Cardiff Road and Miskin area. Mr. Badash stated that he had left the cart unattended for a very short period while he took lunch at a public house in Mountain Ash. It was his opinion that the child was not placed in the cart then, but instead somebody had climbed over the walls of his yard in Aberdeen and left the child there. The coroner, however, dismissed this and concluded the child had come up the valley concealed in the rags. Insufficient evidence to support a charge of murder or manslaughter against anybody, as the child's mother would have been in a distraught state. A very sad story there. And in 1917, Badash is in trouble again, accused of receiving and selling stolen goods, which included brass bearings, brass taps, copper cable, and anti-friction metal from Powell Dufferin Pit, Mountain Ash. The Cumbria Daily Leader of the 17th of October 1917 described Badash in its headline as the villain of the piece, which the chairman of the court described Badash as. The chairman said that if that if this had been his second offence, he would have given him 14 years penal servitude, the maximum sentence at that time. But because it was his first offence, he would be given 3 years. However, as the Aberdeen leader reported on the 17th of November 1917, Badash's conviction had been quashed because of, and I quote, a fatal misdirection of the jury by the chairman, and the 3-year sentence had been excessive. Mr. Badash was discharged from custody. Lucky Badash. Badash does not seem to have learned from his very narrow escape, however. In 1919, he was found guilty of receiving stolen goods from Mr. John Williams of Aberdeen. Badash and Williams knew each other, and they had been tried before for similar crimes. Badash was listed first of all in the directory working at a premises in Maithgwyn Terrace, Gadlis, Aberdeen. On the 17th of August 1930, Badash set sail from Southampton on board Jervis Bay to Port Said, Egypt. However, we're not sure why he went to Egypt and how long he stayed. But Ray, Badash's wife, does not appear to have travelled with her husband, as she is seen on the 1930 electoral roll at number 9 Carlton Terrace, Swansea. However, in 1956, Zavil and Ray left London docks on board the liner Rimon to Haifa, Israel. This is where the story of Zavil Badash, for us at least, finishes. We don't know anything of their later life in Israel, and I presume that they died there. Yep, so that's all for the Cunning Valley at the moment. So back to Rhian.
Yeah, so as you can see from our research, we were able to uncover a lot about certain individuals and businesses.
Yeah.
And that was really important in terms of updating the collections database as well. So if we just go through. So in terms of our successes for the project, we updated the collections database at Cunning Valley Museum. So as I said, when we first started, if you were to type into the programme Jew or Jewish, not many hits came up. There wasn't anything relevant. But by the time we were coming to the end of the project and we had started updating it, there was over 20 hits for the term Jew and Jewish, that sort of thing. So we have actually improved the future access and understanding of the items. It makes it a lot easier to just search and find and understand. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we had to obviously stop doing that because we couldn't access the museum. But by the time that is finished, there should be nearly 100 items in the Jewish sub collection. So that's a really successful. That's a really successful part of the research, the project. Also, as I've said, we created a lot of digital copies of all the items that we found. So we have over 100 scanned images of the items, and they have all been uploaded to the People's Collection Wales website. They include a lot of historical context and just information about either the individual or the image or the business. So I really do recommend that you take a look at the Jewish History Association profile on the People's Collection Wales website. I believe it's just peoplescollectionwales.com. But yeah, that's another really successful outcome because we've been able to make it available to the public, which before it wasn't available to anyone because it was sort of not even recognised or documented as being Jewish. And also another really exciting outcome was we had an open day at Cynon Valley Museum. So I believe it was last February, we had an open day and we showed the public a small collection of the items that we had identified, and it was a really great sort of event because we had people coming in sharing their own memories and their own stories. We had a few people that had said, oh yeah, I used to work at Morris Jacobs when I was 14, or I've still got a Victor Freed wardrobe in my house. So that was really nice for us because we were able to put our research in context, and it also helped the association because a few people agreed to do oral history interviews. So now their stories and that history will be recorded and preserved. So that was really nice. And I think hopefully in the future we'll be able to do more events like that because when everyone starts to talk, people remember more and more. And it's just really great to sort of hear that. And yeah, some of the challenges that another success, which is quite a big thing. So as Geraint was saying, he's researched a lot of individuals in the Jewish community, and we've actually started to create a database of names and families. So we are hoping to obviously expand that in the future, but it's a really good starting point of just having an understanding of the community and who was in it, and that was obviously not something that was there before. Yes, in terms of the challenges, I think obviously initially identifying materials was quite hard. We had to think very laterally, so instead of typing in Jewish, we had to maybe put in a name or part of a name or a street or a bit like business or pawnbroking, things like that. But that was quite hard to begin with. We also came into a lot of dead ends in terms of we would think that we'd found an individual that was relevant, but then we couldn't find any further information. Nothing could confirm or sort of deny. So we found a lot of dead ends, which was quite frustrating. But then I think that's also another good reason to share this research, because we've got so much great feedback from the public and from people from their own experience being able to answer our questions that we have. And then, one final challenge as well, the sort of lack of resources in some areas. It's like sort of having to pay for subscriptions to online newspapers, or just not being able to get to certain information that would have been important to our research. So yeah, that was a challenge for us as well. So we just wanted to say thank you to the Cunning Valley Museum, the staff and all the volunteers who assisted us during this project. Me personally, going into it, I was not sure what we would find, but I think we did a pretty good job, and we uncovered a lot for the Jewish community in Aberdeen. So that was, really, really good. And then, we're happy to take questions if anybody has any.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Geraint and Rhian. Diolch yn fawr. Thank you for a really interesting presentation. And as you said, we do have time for some questions. So I'm going to have a look in the chat box now. If anyone does have any questions, do put them in the chat box and I will ask Rhian and Geraint on your behalf. But I know we've got some things in there already, so I'll take a look now. We have had a comment from Lynn, who's joined us this afternoon. I am Victor Freed's granddaughter and have some original material. So that sounds quite exciting. So I don't know if there's any way that you could get in touch with Lynn.
Yeah,
I don't
that'd
know.
be good.
So I'll hand over to you, Geraint.
That'd be great if we could get in touch somehow with Rob or Claudia. That'd be brilliant.
If we can take an email address, or we could give an email address, whichever is your preference, and then we could go from there. Definitely.
Lynn, if you want to unmute yourself and say something, that's fine.
Well, I'm here. It was extremely interesting. I was aware of everything that you talked about, but of course it was very exciting to hear it talked about officially. I've got lots of letter headings, and I've got a lot of letters in my grandfather's handwriting that he wrote to his brother Nathan, who went to America and suffered very bad luck. And my grandfather supported Nathan and his family right through the war years. He used to send them postal orders, which was all the government would allow. Anyway, it was very interesting, and if I can send you photocopies of my material with pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. That would be amazing.
I have your contact details, Lynn, because obviously you gave them to us at signing up for this. So would it be okay if I put you in touch with Rhiannon and Geraint after this afternoon's talk? Great.
By all means.
I will do that. I will do that. Great. Well, thank you. That's wonderful to have that connection this afternoon. Looking at the chat box again, David Lerman has noted, I had a holiday job in about 1961 selling records at Victor Freed in Duke Street, Cardiff. So you mentioned that there was a Cardiff store, so obviously David had worked there.
That's really cool.
Mm-hmm. And Lynn has made a few more notes as well, saying my mother Edna was company secretary, not shop assistant. She went to London during the war to find stock to bring to Aberdeen to sell. On one occasion, she brought back a load of cooking rings, which were used by the many Jewish evacuees who went to the Welsh valleys to escape the bombings. So that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
And Lynn has also commented about Sydney Shimilov, who, if I remember correctly, was the manager at Morris Jacobs.
Yeah.
I think. Yeah. And Lynn has commented that his brother David married her Auntie Beattie. So another connection there to the Jacobs business, Morris Jacobs as well. David Lerman has commented, Rossa Chin founded the highly successful Lex Motor Group, which was a large publicly quoted business. His son is Sir Trevor Chin. Another son, Nicky Chin, is a very successful songwriter and music producer. I don't know if that's something that you were aware of.
I'm going to be honest here. I've got a note here. I was going to say the Chin family and I forgot. So I do apologize. Yeah. I'll just recap quickly if you don't mind.
No, go ahead.
So we found Eli Chin, we think, is the first who came to the valley. He was born in 1864, 1865 in Lithuania, married Rachel Brits, and they had a son, Rossa, who was mentioned there, and his son then, Sir Trevor Chin. I didn't know about Sir Trevor's son, so that's something to look up. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Geraint. And we have another comment from Jane. I'm in touch with another granddaughter of Victor. So all sorts of connections coming out this afternoon. So that's wonderful. So thanks for the comments. If you do have any questions. Oh, Lynn is asking which one. Jane, if you could let us know which granddaughter. You're welcome to unmute yourself if that's easier. Oh no, we've got here Paula. So that's great. It's wonderful to bring these connections together and see how everyone is linked together. It's great. So if you do have any questions, pop them in the chat box. I have a question, if that's okay, if I can ask a question. I was just wondering, you've both done so much research on the collections at the Cynon Valley Museum. Do you have a favourite item amongst those that you've explored during your time volunteering on the project?
Rhian, are you going to go first, or shall I?
I think my favourite item, which was actually on one of the slides, was the glass slide advertisement for the Jane Cooper business that was owned by Ruth Goldberg. Just because it was sort of, we didn't really mean to find it, but it's very nice to look at and hold and everything. And I sort of imagined it being used in a cinema and the advert coming up before your film. We're not sure exactly when it dates back to, but I think that's my favourite item because I could really picture it being used in context. And yeah, I thought that was a really great find.
Yeah. Mine, for sure, is the paper bag from the Victor Freed shop, because it's so delicate, and we think it's around the 60s maybe, but for that bag to survive all this time in pretty good condition, I think is brilliant. It's absolutely fantastic because it's only a small paper bag about that size, and it's survived probably in someone's private collection all this time, then came to the museum. So that's my favorite, just because it's so delicate.
Oh, well, thank you both. I'm amazed that you managed to answer so quickly, because whenever anyone asks what my favourite item in the archives is, I'm usually a bit stumped and it takes me a while to make a decision. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. Mary Rubin, you have your hand up. Do you want to ask a question?
Indeed, yes. So I'll just introduce myself. I'm actually a medieval historian at Queen Mary University of London. I'm not Welsh, but my partner is half Welsh, but I'm learning Welsh. So I think I just about understood your welcome, Rhian. But I'm also, and what's most relevant here is I'm president of the Jewish Historical Society of England. So I pop into quite a few events like this, and particularly online, it's so much easier, where I hear about different branches and different localities doing work. So first of all, I think it's absolutely wonderful that this work isn't actually motivated by a Jewish historical society, but actually about a local people interested in the local history and wanting to embed Jews within it. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, definitely.
So you are not Jewish. No, I'm just saying I think it's great because it's a way of recognizing the long-standing diversity of these British Isles, and in sort of places that are unexpected, perhaps. The only thing is that when it's a local perspective, so of necessity, it's concentrating in a particular place. And I just wanted you to know that I recently was at a really interesting session about the work that the group in Bangor is doing. And the person who presented was Nathan Abrams, who's a professor there. You probably know him from the archive and so on. And again, it just these extraordinary pictures. And then also Kai Perry, is it Kai Perry?
Kai Perry,
yeah.
Another scholar presenting on places that were further to the north in Wales. So it just occurs to me, I mean, of course, one has to delve with local knowledge into the archives, as you did painstakingly. I'm just thinking, and perhaps this already exists, at what point or on what occasions is it also appropriate to sort of rise up, as it were, and try to connect and to look at connections? Because, of course, people moved also across Wales. So you may well find that some of your people from your valley end up also in archives elsewhere. I'm just wondering if there's any sort of vision about how to sort of synthesize in a way what's being done in the various different localities.
Yeah, I think that's definitely, it's difficult. I've also been doing research on the Treforest Industrial Estate and the Jewish refugee businesses that were there during the Second World War, just after the Second World War. And part of my research was to sort of track where they went. And I'm going to be honest, it was really difficult. I had to get in contact with loads of different archives, with different businesses, and you do come to a lot of dead ends. But it's nice to know that there are people in the north doing it as well. And I think it's definitely worth looking at, or like cross-referencing our information. So yeah, that's a really great point.
And I've just add as well, Rhian and I are doing the Cunning Valley, but they're volunteers in the Rhondda Heritage Centre as well, in the Rhondda, and also in the Pontypridd Museum. But Pontypridd Museum was sadly flooded last winter or the winter before now. So
Yeah.
that's paused. But there are other we are trying to branch out to the other valleys, and I think Merthyr would be really interesting as well, being the biggest town in the area. So I love to do something like that. But I think Rob would say from the Jewish History Association, it's all to do with funding really. And if funding could be found somewhere, then we could do more.
Absolutely. I should just say one more word about this, was that when very early in lockdown, I think probably our first meeting, May, that went online last year, in May, Kai was actually the speaker. And the title was a very general one. It just said, "The Jews of Wales since the 18th century," or something like that. There were about 150 people. It actually went beyond our Zoom license. But what was fascinating, just like here with Lynn and others, that across the screen, first of all, cousins communicated with cousins, but also people said, "Oh, I'm the grandson of this and I'm that, and I have materials, and I was wondering where to put it and where to deposit it." So the more people gather in these sort of spaces, this invaluable information like we had here will pop up, and networks as well. But you're absolutely right. There has to be some sort of infrastructure that allows all it to be collected and people to be properly paid rather than volunteers in order to do the work. And I'm not sure where that comes from.
Right, thank you. We have another comment from Lynn in the chat. This is fantastic. My daughter has an original Victor Fried piano in her home here in Israel. His name is printed on the right-hand corner above the keyboard. It is very precious to us. I can imagine it is. How amazing that the piano has made it to Israel.
I'd love to see a photograph of that, if it's possible.
Indeed.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Lynn. We have Judith Silver. You have your hand up. Did you want to make a comment to ask a question?
Yeah. I'm Lynn's cousin. My grandmother was a sister of Olga Fried, Victor Fried's wife. What I'm interested in is the relationships between the communities of origin in Eastern Europe and South Wales. So Victor Fried came from Lithuania. Olga, whose maiden name was Asher, but it was originally something different, Jezetsky, came from the Poznan region, and the family actually went back to what was then Germany for a while. My grandfather, who on my mother's side, who was Harris Cooperstein, came from the sort of northeastern tip of Poland, sort of near Lithuania, but not Lithuania. And then my other grandfather, who was Ben Silver, came from the Lodz region of Poland. Now, what I'm interested in is the networks of connections and how they originally came to South Wales, and who was it? Who was the cousin who invited them there, or how did they get to know? Which is very, very difficult to find out, but I do think is very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think from experience of trying to research individuals and families, there's a certain point you can get to a certain census, and that's sort of all the information you have. So I definitely.
I can't hear you.
Oh. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. It's my internet connection. It's not wonderful. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah, so I was saying, from doing my own research, you definitely do find, with searching ancestry websites, there's only certain points you can get to, like certain censuses that you can find with really good information. So I definitely agree that I would love to know the wider connection and how everyone did come to be in the Cunning Valley.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that you can connect up with the Jewish Historical Society, and also I belong to the Jewish Genealogical Society of Great Britain, and so obviously when you're trying to find your family roots, you look at their naturalization certificates and where their parents came from, and you go backwards. So I mean, it as you say, it is difficult, but there's always more to be found out if you persist.
Definitely.
Thank you. Anyway.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Judith. And yeah, it was interesting. Thanks for mentioning as well the Jewish Genealogical Society, which I think will be a very useful point of contact, potentially.
Yeah, I've made a note of it. Thank you.
Great.
Yeah.
But thank you very much. Okay, if anyone does have any questions, do pop them in the chat before we bring the event to the close. I did want to ask as well, now that you've both been volunteering with the Jewish History Association of South Wales and with the Cynon Valley Museum, has that inspired you at all to follow a career in history and heritage?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, well, I think I was already interested in that, but it's definitely sparked a greater interest just to see that we sort of identified this whole collection that beforehand no one really knew much about it at all. It was just sort of sitting in a box. Yeah, I would say so, definitely, and it's definitely helped me develop those skills that I would need for a future career in heritage. And me and Geraint both did history. Geraint's still doing history BA, and I did my history BA. So yeah, it has been really good in that respect.
Yeah, the same really. Like I just want to mention, we've produced a walking tour of Aberdeen, a Jewish walking tour, which is available at the Cunning Valley Museum website. And I really enjoyed doing that because it's sort of tangible. You can see where Wilkinson's is now, there was a Jewish shop. Where Woolworths is or was, there was a Jewish shop. And you could walk around and follow it. And I think that's really important to bring sort of history. It isn't in dusty books or dusty man. I know you don't have dust. I read that on the website. but yeah, it's real. You can walk around, and I think Rob is putting together one in Mountain Ash as well, which I helped with. So yeah, I'd like to work in heritage if possible. It's something that I really especially local stuff, I'm really quite passionate about.
Oh, great. Well, as someone who works in history and heritage, I'm really glad to hear that. So that's lovely to hear. Right, well, we don't seem to have any more questions at the moment. So I think probably at that point, we'll bring this afternoon's event to a close. So again, I just want to thank you both, Rhian and Geraint, for such a wonderful afternoon. It's been fantastic finding out more about your work with the Jewish History Association of South Wales in the Cynon Valley. It's been really, really interesting. And just one comment from Miri, which I'm going to bring up. Bangor also created a touring app, so that's good to know as well, that there are more of these tours happening. And Rob is asking, Rhian, if you could put the last slide up, because the contact details are on there.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Oh yeah, that's what I was trying to find a link to the People's Collection Wales. Yeah, I definitely advise going onto that website and also onto the Cynon Valley Museum website, because they have a lot of our work on there, and you can see a lot more images of the items that we found. So yeah,
if you go on the People's Collection Wales, for anyone who's not familiar, just type in Jewish Association of South Wales in the search bar and you'll be directed to all our stuff.
Great. Yes, so yeah, do get in touch with the Jewish History Association of South Wales if you want to find out more. We've done lots of work at Glamorgan Archives with the association, and it's been a fantastic experience, hopefully a continuing experience. So I do recommend that if you're interested, please do get in touch. So before we end, I just want to give a quick plug to our next event, which takes place on Friday, the 14th of May at 10:30 a.m. It's a partnership event with the Living Levels project, and it'll feature a series of mini talks on tours, drives and walks through the Gwent levels, taking us from Tudor times right up to today. So if you do want to join us, have a look at our website and you'll find a link there to be able to book for the next talk. But once again, thank you very much, Geraint, Rhian and the Jewish History Association of South Wales for an incredibly interesting and very enjoyable afternoon. And thank you as well to all of you for joining. Thank you very much. Good afternoon.